The call came in at 6:47 in the morning. A woman on the line, calm, almost eerily so, telling the Collier County dispatcher that she had woken up and found her husband unresponsive in the master bedroom of their home on Pelican Bay Drive in Naples, Florida. No screaming, no hysteria, just a measured, careful voice saying the words in the right order. "My husband isn't breathing. I think something is wrong. Please send someone." The first responding officer, Deputy Marcus Okafor, arrived at the property at 7:04. He would later describe the moment he turned off Pelican Bay Drive and saw the house for the first time as one of those moments that just stops you, and you can understand why. The Hale residence was not a house. It was a statement. 6,000 square feet of white-painted concrete and floor-to-ceiling glass, sitting behind a gated circular driveway lined with Italian cypress trees, a 3-car garage to the left, a fountain in the center of the drive that was still running, and beyond the rear of the house, visible through the glass, the shimmer of a private pool, and a canal beyond it that opened onto the Gulf of Mexico. Deputy Okafor pressed the intercom at the gate. It buzzed open before he finished announcing himself. She was waiting at the front door when he came up the drive. 35 years old. Blonde hair loose around her shoulders. She was wearing a cream silk robe and holding a coffee mug in both hands, as though she needed something to hold on to. Her eyes were red-rimmed. She had been crying, or had produced the convincing aftermath of it. She said her name was Brooke Hale. She said her husband's name was Richard Hale. She said she didn't know what happened. She said she woke up and he was just there, in the bed, and she knew immediately that something was wrong. She said she couldn't bring herself to touch him. Deputy Okafor entered the residence and found Richard Hale in the master bedroom on the second floor. 61 years old, founder and former CEO of a commercial real estate development firm based in Tampa. He was in bed, positioned on his back, hands at his sides, eyes closed, expression peaceful. The room was immaculate. Not one item out of place. The bedside table held a glass of water, a reading lamp, a phone charging cable, and a single prescription pill bottle. The medical examiner who arrived 40 minutes later would note that the scene had a quality of arrangement to it that she found unusual, not that anything was definitively wrong. Just that nothing was the way things usually look when a person dies unexpectedly in their sleep. Usually there's some sign of disturbance, a knocked glass, tangled sheets, a position that reflects the body's last moments of involuntary movement. Richard Hale looked like he had been placed there. Like a prop. That instinct, noted informally in the medical examiner's initial walkthrough log, would prove to be one of the most important observations in the entire case. Brooke Hale was 35 years old. She had been married to Richard for 6 years. She had met him at a charity gala in Sarasota in the spring of 2017, when she was 28, and working as a pharmaceutical sales representative for a mid-sized drug company based in Tampa. Richard had been 54 at the time, recently divorced from his first wife of 22 years, and by all accounts, lonely in the particular way that very wealthy, very busy men become lonely when the structure of their lives collapses, and they realize they have spent decades building things, and very little time living inside them. Brooke had been warm, attentive, and beautiful. He had called her the following week. Their courtship moved quickly. They were engaged within 8 months, and married in a ceremony in the Cayman Islands in March of 2018. Small, private, no family from Richard's side beyond his adult son from his first marriage. A 30-year-old named Connor, who had flown in from Seattle and spent most of the reception standing near the bar, with an expression that guests would later describe, charitably, as complicated. Richard's first wife, Diane, who had received a settlement of approximately $4 million in the divorce, declined to comment publicly on the remarriage. Her attorney, however, had filed 2 motions related to the post-nuptial modification of a family trust in the months surrounding Richard's engagement to Brooke. Both motions had been denied. The trust, restructured in the fall of 2017, had named Brooke Hale as the primary beneficiary in the event of Richard's death. The value of that trust, as of the morning Richard Hale was found unresponsive in his bed, was $11.3 million. The house on Pelican Bay Drive was worth $3 million alone. Deputy Okafor stayed with Brooke in the living room, while the medical examiner and a second officer processed the upstairs. The living room was the kind of space that makes you feel like you are inside a magazine. White marble floors, 16-foot ceilings, a wall of glass facing the pool and the canal beyond, a kitchen island the size of a small boat, and on every surface, the particular kind of tasteful, expensive decoration that signals not wealth exactly, but the professional management of wealth. Someone had hired someone to make this room look exactly like this. Brooke sat on a white linen sofa and answered Deputy Okafor's initial questions in a voice that was quiet and controlled. She said Richard had seemed fine the night before. They had dinner at home, she had cooked, pasta, nothing special. He had a glass of wine, he had gone to bed around 10, which was his normal time. She had stayed up reading in the sitting room off the kitchen, came to bed around midnight, noticed he seemed deeply asleep, and didn't think anything of it. She woke at 6:30, reached over, and his skin was cold. Deputy Okafor asked if Richard had any known medical conditions. She said he had high blood pressure, managed with medication. She gestured vaguely toward the pill bottle upstairs. He had a cardiologist in Naples he saw every 6 months. His last appointment had been in September, 2 months ago. Everything had been fine, she said. The cardiologist had said everything was fine. What Brooke did not mention, and what investigators would discover 4 days later, was that Richard Hale had updated his will 11 days before his death. The medical examiner's preliminary report, filed 48 hours after Richard's body was removed from the residence, listed the cause of death as pending toxicological analysis. The report noted no obvious signs of trauma, no defensive wounds, no external injuries of any kind. But it also noted a finding that pushed the case from a routine sudden death notification into something else entirely. The potassium level in Richard Hale's blood was significantly elevated, high enough to suggest, in combination with his otherwise normal presentation, the possible administration of an exogenous substance. Something introduced from outside the body. High potassium, administered in sufficient quantity, causes cardiac arrest. It is one of the oldest methods in forensic pathology's catalog of difficult-to-detect homicides, because in a person with a pre-existing heart condition, the death can look entirely natural. A man with high blood pressure, in his 60s, found peacefully in bed. The initial read writes itself. It takes a careful examiner, or a lucky flag in a toxicology panel, to find it. The Collier County Medical Examiner was careful, and the toxicology panel was thorough. Detective Carla Messing of the Collier County Sheriff's Office was assigned to the case on day 3. Messing had 17 years in homicide, 12 of them in Naples, which meant she had worked enough high-net-worth cases to know that money was almost always the architecture of the story, even when it wasn't the headline. She requested Richard's financial records, his will, the trust documentation, and the phone records for both Richard and Brooke going back 12 months. What came back over the following 10 days would reframe everything. The will update, dated 11 days before Richard's death, had been executed at a law firm in downtown Naples. The changes were significant. Richard's son Connor had previously been named co-beneficiary of the primary estate alongside Brooke, with provisions allocating approximately 40% of the liquid assets to Connor outright upon Richard's death. The updated will removed Connor entirely from the liquid asset distribution. Everything, the house, the accounts, the trust, flowed to Brooke. Connor received a single bequest, his grandfather's watch, valued at approximately $300. Connor Hale had been informed of the will change by the estate attorney 3 days after his father's death. By the time Detective Messing attempted to reach him for an initial interview, he had already retained a lawyer. In a statement provided through his attorney, Connor Hale said he had last spoken to his father by phone approximately 3 weeks before his death. He said his father had seemed distracted during the call, not himself. He said his father had mentioned, in passing, that Brooke had been encouraging him to simplify his estate planning. Connor's attorney submitted, along with the statement, a series of text messages between Connor and Richard from the preceding 6 months that painted a picture of a relationship under strain, not hostile exactly, but thinning. In several of the messages, Richard mentioned feeling pulled in different directions. In one, sent in August, he wrote, "She thinks you and I are too close. I don't know what to say to that." Brooke's phone records were reviewed by a digital forensics analyst on day 9 of the investigation. The records revealed several things of interest. First, Brooke had made 14 calls over the preceding 4 months to a number registered to a man named Derek Solano, 32 years old, a personal trainer based in Naples. The calls were clustered in the late afternoon and early evening on days when, cross-referenced against the household security system logs, Richard Hale had been either at his office in Tampa or traveling for work. Second, Brooke had conducted a series of internet searches in the weeks preceding Richard's death. The searches, recovered from the browser history on her personal laptop via search warrant, included the terms potassium overdose symptoms, how is potassium detected in autopsy, potassium chloride availability, TOC, AC, R, and perhaps most damningly, how long does potassium stay in the bloodstream after death? Those searches had been conducted on October the 3rd, October the 9th, and October the 14th. Richard Hale died on October the 22nd. Detective Messing obtained a warrant for Derek Solano's phone records on day 11. The records confirmed what Brooks' calls had suggested. The two had been in frequent contact for at least 5 months. The text messages, recovered from Solano's carrier, began as the kind of exchanges you might expect between a client and a personal trainer: scheduling, workout notes, nutritional questions. They shifted in character around July. By August, they were unambiguous. In a message sent on August the 17th, Brooke wrote, "I can't keep doing this the way we're doing it. There has to be a way out." Solano replied, "I know, we'll figure it out, just be patient." On September the 2nd, Brooke wrote, "He changed the life insurance. Again." "It's more than I thought," Solano replied with a single word, "Good." On September the 28th, 6 days before the first potassium-related internet search, Solano sent Brooke a photograph. The photograph showed a small glass vial with a printed label. Brooke replied, "Where did you get that?" Solano replied, "Don't worry about it, you know what to do." Derek Solano was arrested at his apartment in Naples on the morning of November the 4th, 15 days after Richard Hale's death. He was taken into custody without incident, dressed in gym clothes, a protein shake on the counter behind him. He said nothing during processing. His attorney, a criminal defense lawyer from Miami, arrived at the Collier County Jail by early afternoon. Brooke Hale was brought in for formal questioning that same morning. She arrived with her own attorney, a Naples-based estate litigator named Patricia Voss, who had clearly been retained in advance, not a last-minute call, but someone who had already been briefed and was ready. That detail was not lost on Detective Messing. The interview lasted 3 hours. Brooke was composed throughout. She expressed grief on cue, paused in the right places, dabbed her eyes with a tissue she produced from her handbag at precisely the moments that warranted it. She denied any knowledge of Derek Solano beyond a professional training relationship. She denied any awareness of the potassium findings. When Detective Messing placed a printed copy of the browser search history on the table between them, Brooke looked at it for a long moment, then looked at her attorney, who advised her not to respond. She did not respond. When Messing asked about the will change, Brooke said it had been Richard's idea entirely. She said he had mentioned feeling that his estate planning was unnecessarily complicated, and that he wanted to streamline it. She said she had not encouraged him. She said Connor had always had a difficult relationship with his father, and that Richard had simply arrived at his own conclusions about how he wanted to leave things. Her voice was even throughout. Her hands, Messing would later note in her report, were completely still. At no point during the 3-hour interview did Brooke Hale express curiosity about how her husband had died. She did not ask about the toxicology results. She did not ask whether the investigation had reached any conclusions. She sat in that room for 3 hours and accepted information without once reaching for more of it. That, Detective Messing wrote, was the tell. Innocent people want to know. They ask questions. They press for answers because the not knowing is unbearable. Brooke Hale already knew everything she needed to know. The toxicology report was finalized on November the 8th. It confirmed the presence of potassium chloride at levels inconsistent with natural physiological processes, particularly given that Richard Hale's dietary intake in the 24 hours before his death, reconstructed through interviews with Brooke and a review of grocery receipts, had contained no meaningful source of the ready compound. The medical examiner amended the cause of death to homicide, the manner: cardiac arrest induced by potassium chloride poisoning. Richard Hale had been murdered. The method of delivery became the next question. There was no injection site on his body, or rather, no obvious one. But the forensic team, returning to the residence with a more specific mandate, found something they had initially cataloged and moved past. In the master bathroom, in the cabinet above Richard's sink, separate from Brooks, was his blood pressure medication. Standard prescription, nothing unusual. But beside it was a second bottle, labeled identically, that contained something that was not his blood pressure medication. The pills inside were adulterated. A forensic pharmacist who analyzed the contents found that each capsule had been opened, partially emptied, and refilled with a compound that included potassium chloride alongside the original medication. Done carefully, consistently, Over time, the cumulative effect would raise potassium levels gradually. Then a final, larger dose in the food or drink on the last evening would push the heart past the point of recovery. It was methodical, it was patient, it required knowledge of pharmacology, access to the medication, and proximity to Richard Hale over an extended period of time. It was not a crime of passion. It was a project. Brooke's background in pharmaceutical sales suddenly took on an entirely different character. The adulterated pill bottle was logged as evidence. The pasta dinner Brooke had described cooking the night Richard died, the last meal, the glass of wine was reconstructed as best it could be from residual contents in the kitchen trash and the recycling bin. A wine glass that had not been fully cleaned, retrieved from the back of the dishwasher rack, tested positive for traces of potassium chloride at a concentration far above what any food source could explain. She had put it in his wine. The arrest warrant for Brooke Hale was signed by a Collier County judge on the morning of November the 12th, 21 days after Richard's body had been found in that immaculate, perfectly arranged bedroom. Detective Messing and 2 uniformed officers drove to the residence on Pelican Bay Drive at 9 in the morning. The fountain in the circular driveway was still running. The cypress trees were perfectly trimmed. Everything about the house looked exactly the same as it had on the morning Deputy Okafor had first pulled through that gate. Brooke answered the door in a white blouse and tailored slacks, as though she had been expecting them. Her attorney was already there, standing in the foyer. Brooke looked at the warrant in Detective Messing's hand. She looked at the detective's face. And then, in a voice that was so steady it stopped everyone in the doorway for a moment, she said, "I'd like to say goodbye to the house, before we go." Detective Messing would later say that request was the single most unsettling thing she heard throughout the entire investigation. Not because it was hostile or dramatic. Because of the grammar of it. Not, "I want a moment." Not, "Can I get my things?" "I'd like to say goodbye to the house." As though the house were a person. As though she was the one who had built it, earned it, deserved it. As though it had always been hers, and the only question had been how long it would take everyone else to understand that. The request was denied. Brooke Hale was taken into custody on November the 12th, charged with first-degree murder, conspiracy to commit murder, and 3 counts of financial fraud. The fraud charges related to a series of transfers Brooke had initiated from Richard's business accounts in the weeks before his death, moving approximately $800,000 into accounts held in her name alone at a bank in the Cayman Islands. The transfers had been structured carefully to stay below the reporting thresholds, executed over 18 days in increments of just under $10,000 each. It was a technique known as structuring, and it was a federal crime on top of everything else. Derek Solano was charged the same day with conspiracy to commit murder and accessory after the fact. His cooperation with prosecutors, which began within 48 hours of his arrest, proved critical to the state's case. In exchange for a reduced charge and a sentencing recommendation, Solano provided investigators with a detailed account of his relationship with Brooke, the planning that had preceded Richard's death, and most importantly, a storage unit in East Naples that he had rented under a false name in August. Inside that unit, printed research documents on potassium chloride toxicity, a burner phone containing additional messages between Solano and Brooke, and a handwritten timeline on a yellow legal pad that appeared to map out a sequence of events corresponding almost exactly to what the investigation had independently reconstructed. Brooke's attorney attempted to distance her from Solano's account, arguing he was a compromised witness trading testimony for leniency. The prosecution responded with the browser searches, the adulterated pill bottle, the wine glass, and the Cayman Island transfers. They also introduced evidence that Brooke had attended a continuing education seminar on pharmaceutical compounding 18 months before Richard's death, a seminar that covered, among other topics, the properties and interactions of potassium compounds. Connor Hale testified during the preliminary hearing. He was composed on the stand, though visibly strained. He described his father as a good man, who had become isolated from the people who knew him best during the years of his marriage to Brooke. He described a phone call from 6 weeks before his father's death, in which Richard had said, quietly, almost as an aside, that he sometimes felt like a guest in his own home. Connor said he had not known what to make of that at the time. He said he knew exactly what to make of it now. Diane Hale, Richard's first wife, submitted a written statement to the court. She did not testify in person. The statement was 4 sentences long. It said that she had known from the moment she heard about the remarriage that something was wrong. It said she had tried to tell people that, and had not been heard. It said she was sorry she hadn't tried harder. It said she hoped justice was enough, even when it came too late. Brooke Hale's trial began in March of 2023 in Collier County Circuit Court. It lasted 19 days. The prosecution presented 42 pieces of physical evidence, 11 expert witnesses, and the testimony of Derek Solano, who took the stand for 2 full days and described in careful, methodical detail every conversation he and Brooke had ever had about Richard's death. He was cross-examined aggressively. He held up. The defense built its case on 3 arguments. First, that Solano was an unreliable witness whose testimony had been purchased with a plea agreement. Second, that the browser searches, while damaging in appearance, were circumstantial and could not be directly linked to any physical act. Third, that the financial transfers were the result of Richard himself encouraging Brooke to establish financial independence, a claim for which the defense produced a single email from Richard, dated 2 months before his death, in which he had encouraged her to look into her own financial planning. The prosecution pointed out that the email had been sent from Richard's account on a device that had, in the weeks before his death, also been accessed from an IP address registered to Brooke's personal laptop. The jury deliberated for 11 hours, across 2 days. On March 29, 2023, they returned a verdict of guilty on all counts. Brooke Hale stood at the defense table as the verdict was read, and did not move. She did not cry. She did not reach for her attorney. She stood with her hands folded in front of her, her face completely composed, her posture perfect, and she absorbed each count in silence. The courtroom was very still. The only sound, according to people who were present, was Connor Hale exhaling a long, slow breath from the gallery that seemed to carry 6 years of something in it. Judge Raymond Castillo sentenced Brooke Hale, on May 8, 2023, life in prison without the possibility of parole, on the first-degree murder count, 30 years concurrent on the conspiracy charge, 10 years concurrent on each fraud count. He noted in his sentencing remarks that the crime was distinguished not by impulse or desperation, but by deliberation, by patience, by a willingness to sit across from a man every evening at dinner, and look at him and smile and know what she was doing to him. He said that level of premeditation placed the crime in a category that the court could not address with anything less than the full weight of the sentence available to it. She was transported to the Florida Women's Reception Center in Ocala on May 10. She did not make a statement at sentencing. Her attorney read a brief prepared remark on her behalf, stating that she maintained her innocence and intended to appeal. The appeal was filed in August of 2023. As of the time of this account, it remains pending. The house on Pelican Bay Drive was seized as part of the fraud recovery proceedings. The fountain in the circular driveway was turned off. The cypress trees, untended, began to lose their shape. The pool was drained. The estate went into probate, where it has remained, contested between Connor Hale's legal representatives and the state's asset recovery process, for the better part of 2 years. Derek Solano received a sentence of 12 years and is currently incarcerated at a state facility in Central Florida. He will be eligible for parole in 2030. The $11.3 million trust was frozen, pending the outcome of the fraud litigation. Richard Hale's grandfathers watched the $300 bequest. The only thing Connor received was delivered to him by the estate attorney in a small cardboard box with a typed letter. Connor has not spoken publicly about the case since his courtroom testimony. He returned to Seattle and, by all available accounts, has tried to build a life at a significant distance from everything that happened in that house on Pelican Bay Drive. Brooke Hale is 45 minutes from Naples. She will likely die in state custody. The fountain is off. The gate is padlocked. The water in the canal behind the house reflects nothing but sky. There's a particular kind of story that stays with you, not because of its violence or its drama, but because of its patience, the cold, quiet, deliberate patience of someone who decided exactly what they wanted and moved toward it one careful step at a time. Brooke Hale did not snap. She did not panic. She planned. She waited. She cooked dinner and poured wine and watched her husband go to bed, and she knew exactly what the morning would bring. The house is empty now. Everything she built inside it is gone. And the thing that lingers, the detail that investigators and journalists and everyone who followed this case came back to, was that request at the front door when the detectives arrived with the warrant. That one quiet sentence. I'd like to say goodbye to the house before we go. Not to Richard. Not to her life, her marriage, her future. To the house. That is the sentence that tells you everything you need to know about what Brooke Hale actually wanted and what she was actually willing to do to get it. And that is what makes this case, in the end, not just a murder story. It is a story about what happens when someone decides that the life they want belongs to someone else, and the only question left is how to take it.